J. Warner Wallace is a cold case homicide detective who's been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Dateline, and Court TV. Now, we join him as he applies his investigative skills to making a case for Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at Cold Case Christianity. I'm J. Warner Wallace. If you notice that there's a perception in the culture that Christians are in some ways opposed to science, right? Like we're the ones who seem like we're hesitant to wear masks. You hear this all the time on social media. I see it constantly. That we somehow don't want to be vaccinated for one reason or another, almost as though we're saying, and of course the culture says, you must do these things. You must act on the advice of scientists, because scientists appear to be the authority to which all of us are ready to submit our freedoms, to submit our will. If scientists say it is so, aren't we supposed to believe it so? In other words, are they the final authority? Is that the rub between Christians who believe the Word of God is our final authority, and those who are in the secular world who default to something else as their authority, often to the proclamations of scientists? Does this mean then that Christians are opposed to scientists, are opposed to science in general? Of course, this is not the case, but it seems to me as I watch what's happening on social media that this is the perception that is growing, that somehow Christians are opposed to the authority of science, or opposed to what science might discover, or opposed even to the process by which we might learn something from science. Of course, that's not true. And so I want to give you today 3 reasons why Christians don't need to be afraid of the sciences. And in fact, we aren't afraid of the sciences for these 3 reasons. And all of this comes from my new book, Person of Interest. This is one chapter in the new book talking about the impact that Jesus had on the sciences. Why Jesus matters in a world that rejects the Bible. Well, science is one of the reasons why Jesus matters in a world that might reject the authority. So today, let's just talk about 3 reasons why Christians are not afraid of the sciences. All right, what's the first? Well, the first reason why Christians aren't afraid of the sciences is because the sciences actually confirm the existence of God. Now, I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people who might, on first sense, say, well, no, you cannot prove God's existence at all. That's what they take as a matter of faith. Is that true? I wrote a whole book about this called God's Crime Scene. And in God's Crime Scene, I simply asked the question, is there evidence in the universe, if we took the universe as a crime scene, would we have any good reason, based on just what we discover in the universe, that God exists? And I use a process that I describe in that book, in which we talk about an inside or outside the room model, which is what we use in many death scenes to determine if the death scene is in fact a crime scene. Now, I try to do this in all my books. I try to give you an investigative model that we actually use when working in cases that will help you determine if a claim is true, if the Gospels are reliable. We talked about that in Cold Case Christianity. And in God's Crime Scene, we use this model of inside or outside the room, the same process of abductive reasoning that we use in death scenes to determine if there's enough evidence in the universe to determine that God exists, that it's His crime scene in essence. Now, one of the things we talk about in that is a couple of chapters on the role that science, well, the entire book is really the role that science and philosophy plays in building an evidential case for God's existence. But what we talk about in that book are a couple of ways in which the sciences actually help us to make a case for God's existence, which is part of the foundation of the Christian worldview. If God does not exist, then the Christian God does not exist. So we have to build a case for God's existence first before we can move to the Gospels to determine if they're telling us anything true about Jesus. So think about this for a second. We know just from the sciences and the disciplines in the sciences of astrophysics, cosmology, we know that those scientific disciplines help us to establish some truths about the universe. They happen to help us establish a truth that the universe is not infinitely old. The universe had a beginning. That's a very important issue for those of us who are trying to understand how all of this came to be. If the universe had always existed, well, then there's no reason to look for a cause of the universe. But things that have a beginning have beginners, causes, which initiate the beginning of any event or series of events or something like the universe. If it has a beginning, then it's reasonable for us, just looking at the simple law of causality, to examine what could possibly be sufficient as a cause to cause the beginning of the universe. And this idea that we are in a universe that has a beginning, that all space, time, and matter leapt into existence from nothing, is still the most widely held view of the universe based on scientists, cosmologists, and astrophysicists. This is why this is called the standard cosmological model. It's called that because although there are other theories, quantum theories, there are theories of multiverse, all these different other theories, string theories, these are held by a small percentage of scientists. The vast majority of scientists hold to the idea that the science demonstrates, and we talk about this in God's Crime Scene, we talk about how the science actually demonstrates that we are in a universe that has a beginning. And when we say a universe, we're talking about all the stuff of the universe, quote unquote. Space, time, and matter, according to the science, so we make a case for this in God's Crime Scene, has a beginning. And that means whatever the beginner is for all space, time, and matter, it cannot itself be spatial, material, or temporal. It's not made of space, time, or matter because those things are not available until the universe begins. You cannot begin yourself. So therefore, we're looking for something outside of space, time, and matter. And that's why the cosmological argument for the existence of God is so troublesome. And people spend so much time trying to work around that. Atheists who deny the existence of God spend a lot of time attacking those of us who make a case from cosmology. Well, why? Because they know that that's a compelling... Look, whenever you see a defense attorney attack a particular piece of evidence, you can discover really quickly in a trial which piece of evidence is most threatening to the defense, because that is the piece they are going to attack the most vociferously, the most aggressively. And sure enough, this is what you see happening when it comes to cosmological argument. You'll find all kinds of videos in which somebody is trying to argue or debate this issue of cosmology because they understand the implications of a universe that came into existence, all space, time, and matter. The sciences tell us this, came into existence from nothing, and that means we're looking for a sufficient cause, powerful enough to create everything from nothing, and this cause must be outside of space, time, and matter. You're starting to sound a lot like God when you are talking about a cause that's that powerful. What kind of cause could be sufficient to create Now, I'm not even talking about the fine-tuning. There's another aspect of the sciences that can tell us something about the unique way in which our universe is fine-tuned. From all of the possible ways in which the laws of physics could have emerged, the fact that we are in a universe that appears to be fine-tuned to allow our existence in the first place is still troublesome for a lot of scientists who are trying to figure out, and most of them would admit that, yeah, it's possible for any other set of laws to have been in place, but this set of laws, and in a multiverse theory, they often think that there are some other versions of universes in which other laws are in play. My whole point here is that the fine-tuning of the universe is just another way that the sciences make us scratch our head and actually point to the most reasonable inference that there is a cause outside of space, time, and matter that is sufficiently powerful enough to create everything from nothing, is outside of space, time, and matter, and is a fine-tuner that has the ability to fine-tune the cosmology, to fine-tune the position of galaxies, the position of our sun, for example, the nature of our planet, the atmospheric conditions of our planet, are just so that life can emerge, life like ours, that has the ability to look back and look for its creator. The sciences help us to do that. Now, you can talk about this philosophically, but it turns out that each scientific discovery, from discoveries about the background radiation in the universe, from discoveries based on the second law of thermodynamics, there's a number of these we discuss in the book, God's Crime Scene, that'll help you to see how the sciences actually help us to understand the nature of our universe that is best explained by a powerful cause, an all-powerful cause outside of space, time, and matter. Interestingly, there is more than that, because the biological sciences help us to drill down into the nature, the origin of life. Studies that you see happening right now are actually an excellent indicator, an excellent series of evidences that point to an intelligent mind as the source, for example, of the biological information in DNA. This is information in the sense that if you measure information and the levels of information, it turns out that the information in DNA is the highest level of information that actually commands certain things to happen with an expectation that something, several dominoes downstream, will occur if I take care of this up front. And this information is such that it must come from something. It has to have a source. Can you get information from just the stuff of the universe? Can you get information from just space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry? You can get a lot from space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry, but you cannot get information. I'm going to give you an example. I always talk about this. If I was to walk into a room and there's some blood spatter on the wall and a dead body on the floor, you might wonder if that blood spatter is caused by a human interaction. Did somebody kill this person? Or did they fall in such a way that they hit the floor? The physics of blood, the chemistry of blood, the physics of the spatter, the chemistry of the blood itself on the wall might account for all of the spatter we're seeing on the wall. That might simply be a matter of space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry. But if I walked in the same room and I saw on the wall, instead of blood spatter, words written in the victim's blood, he deserved this. Well, now I'm looking for a suspect because I realize that I can't get information from space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry. Information comes from minds. Well, what is the mind behind the information in DNA? You see, I think the sciences actually help us to determine that God exists and something about his nature before we ever open a holy book of any kind, a scripture of any kind. So, the first reason I think that Christians are not afraid of the sciences is because the sciences actually can help us build a case for God's existence. Let's take a break. When we come back, I'll give you a second reason why Christians are not afraid of the sciences. Coming this fall, join me, J. Warner Wallace, on a 10-part journey based on my book, Person of Interest. We'll investigate a real homicide together, and we'll also examine the unparalleled impact Jesus had on human history. We'll trace the fuse that burned toward the disappearance of Tammy Hayes, then sift through the fallout that eventually implicated her husband. In a similar way, we'll examine the historical fuse that burned toward the appearance of Jesus and marvel at the fallout and unexpected impact Jesus had on our world. Finally, we'll ask the critical question: does Jesus still matter in a world that's increasingly skeptical of the Bible? Let's discover if Jesus is history's true person of interest. Okay, let me give you a second reason why Christians are not afraid of the sciences. And this is, again, something I'm talking about quite a bit in one of the chapters in our book, Person of Interest, Why Jesus Matters in a World That Rejects the Bible. But Jesus does matter to the sciences. And by the way, this is available right now for pre-sale, this book, and this pre-sale offer is going to include a bunch of bonus materials, and those are not going to be available forever. This is going on pre-sale until September 21st, and after that, it's just you buy the book. But if you want those pre-sale items, you have to buy it now. So I would appreciate it if you would go and purchase that book at personofinterestbook.com, personofinterestbook.com. Okay, all that being said, Christians are not afraid of the sciences because we understand that it's a Christian worldview that actually catalyzed the sciences. If you look, I talk about this in the chapter, you'll see. I'm not going to be able to kind of blow the mystery for you here, but if you look in the book, it's highly illustrated, 400 illustrations, and several of these are charts, and you will see the growth of science and when it occurs in history. And you'll notice that it occurs after the appearance of Jesus of Nazareth. That explosion of scientific evidence, scientific activity occurs. The beginning of that rise occurs after Jesus of Nazareth appears. Now that might just be a coincidence, or there might be some way in which the worldview inaugurated by Jesus acts as a catalyst for this type of, and I've given you in the book several reasons why the Christian worldview, especially when compared to other ancient worldviews that preceded Christendom, Christianity is a catalyst for the sciences. And I'm only going to give you one here, just one, very, very briefly. And that is that Christianity had a view of God that made the exploration of the natural environment possible. Paul says in Romans 1 that no one's got an excuse to not believe in God, because what can be known about the Creator can be seen in His creation. And interestingly, a unique view of Christianity compared to other ancient worldviews argued, especially when you compare the God of Christianity to the gods, plural gods, of ancient mythologies, most of whom were capricious and unpredictable. They acted sometimes like fallen humans. You saw this a lot in the pantheon of gods that preceded Jesus. The stories, those mythological stories of those gods, they were often misbehaving. They were often drunken and debaucherous. They were often anything other than holy. And you will see this over and over again, this unpredictability, this irrationality of pagan mythologies. Then you have a view of God that's introduced by Judaism and Christianity, in which God is not only not capricious, he's orderly, he is rational, he is logical, and he creates a world and people in his image that possess the logical reasoning ability, because they're in the image of God, to be able to examine the logical, orderly world that God has created. This view, believe it or not, we take it for granted, right? I mean, we think, well, yeah, duh. Well, yeah, but to be honest, the ancients didn't feel this way. The ancients didn't believe God had this kind of nature. The gods of antiquity were often very unreliable, often very unpredictable, irrational. So the idea that we are in an environment created by a rational God who's created us in his image, although we have fallen from the image of God as we were created, we still possess the ability to reason through the created world created by a rational God. And as Paul says, that's why no one's got an excuse. The psalmist, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, and night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, yet their voices, it cries out. How can that be? How can their voice be heard to the end of the earth, as it says by the psalmist? How can that be the case? Well, the voice of God, as seen in his creation, is discovered on a daily basis by scientists. And this is one of the reasons why science blossoms under a Christian worldview. Now think about that for a second. People will often say, well, yeah, Jim, come on. I mean, yeah, the scientific revolution is like 99% Christians, but duh, at that point in the world, that's all that was there was Christians, okay? If you're looking at 15th, 16th, 17th century Europe, well, that's all you have were Christians, Christ followers in one form or another. So why would you be surprised when you find science is blossoming? Well, here's why I'm surprised. Science could have blossomed anywhere large groups of people lived. There were far more non-Europeans at that point in history than there were Europeans. There were people all over the globe. Why didn't it blossom in the Middle East? Why didn't it blossom in Persia? Why didn't it blossom in Asia? Why didn't it blossom in China? Why did it blossom in Europe under this thing we call Christendom? Why? Given that this is not the largest people group, considering the rest of the people in the world, it could have blossomed anywhere. Why there? There's nothing special about the Europeans. There's nothing special about that region of the world. What's special is the worldview they held. Now, I've only told you one of the several catalysts for scientific discovery that are generated by a Christian worldview. But in Person of Interest, I actually give you an entire list. I think when you read that list, you'll go, oh, okay, I get it. I can see now that science, as we know it, is actually a gift of the Christian worldview. Now, I know that sounds like very, very exclusive, and in some ways maybe not politically correct anymore to say. But if you just look historically at where science exploded at the highest pace, at the greatest rate, you're going to see that it explodes under Christendom in that period of time known as the scientific revolution. I didn't create that term. If you've studied in your classes, you know that that term is used by people who don't even believe in Christianity, but they understand that there was something going on at a period of time in which every major scientific discipline was born. And that's yet another reason why Christians aren't afraid of the sciences. We'll talk about that right after the break. Do you get a sense that censorship is rising? If we simply just reiterate the teaching of Jesus of Nazareth, there's a good chance someone in the culture is going to see that as intolerant. I'm J. Warner Wallace, cold case detective and Christian case maker. If you're concerned like I am about being deplatformed, about being canceled by a culture that has control over your mechanisms to interact with each other, and that's what it is with social media, then please join us at a private community we are building at coldcasechristianity.com. And I want you to join us if you're interested in being mentored, in being discipled in a way that will help you become a better Christian case maker. It's a platform where you can know, is the Bible true and does it matter? Those two things will change your life. Join us at coldcasechristianity.com. You won't regret it.
Jim continues to write books designed to help you become a better Christian case maker.
Okay, here's the third reason why Christians are not afraid of the sciences. And that's because Christians have dominated the sciences. So much so, in fact, that the entire truth of the Christian worldview, the entire truth of Christianity, of Jesus, can be reconstructed from the pages of the most important scientists who ever lived. That's right, and believe it or not, people don't still understand that Christianity has dominated the sciences, and Christians, Christ followers, have historically dominated the sciences. Now, I know that that's something that, for the most part, a lot of our young people have forgotten. There's a sense in which, like if I'm really chasing God hard, I've been raised in a Christian family, Christian parents, and I really am devoted to Yahweh, devoted to Jesus. Whether either one of these focuses, either in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, you just feel like you want to do something to give your life back to God. All that grace that's been extended to you, right? You want to extend that now and be gracious and love others. Well, how do I do that? Do I have to then go to seminary? Is that the only way that I can really participate or give my time or give my efforts or give my life professionally as a vocation? Does that mean if I love God this much, the only choice I have is to somehow get involved in ministry? Or is it possible that there are other ways that I could just as equally, just as well intended, give my life to the devotion of God? Is science really one of those places? Yeah, it turns out that there have been people historically who have seen their work in the sciences as an act of holy devotion. And we have dominated the sciences for this reason. Now think about that for a second. Lots of folks are committed to something they love, they like. They're just geeked out about it. I like physics, so I find myself working as a physicist. Why? Because I don't believe in God, but I just love physics. I love the number crunching, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I can see somebody who would work really hard because they just are geeked out by this kind of stuff. On the other hand, if you're geeked out by this kind of stuff and you see your work as an act of holy devotion to the God you so desperately love, that's a whole nother level of devotion. To see your work as a scientist, as an act of devotion, that's typically, you can say, oh, he's devoted to his work. Well, I'm devoted to the God that I am actually investigating as part of my work. And I could do that as a theologian, but I could also do that as a scientist. We talk about this in this chapter on science. I'm not going to give all that away. You can certainly deep dive into that. But I just want you to know that the history of science is absolutely cluttered with Christians who have had an oversized impact. I mean, an unbelievably oversized impact on not only the history of Christianity, but the history of science, but the trajectory of science. And Christians have had that kind of impact. And so I'll just, in the book, it's like I said, it's highly illustrated. There's 400 illustrations. I'll just show you like one from the scientific revolution. I've actually identified the top players during the scientific revolution, and I've got them illustrated as if they are sitting in a kind of like a Hall of Fame, with the busts of all the best, scientists, kind of like the Canton, Ohio Hall of Fame, with all the football players. If you just look at the number of people who are involved, and it turns out that each and every one of them, well, not each and every one, but the vast majority of them are described by even sources that are hostile to Christianity. Like, for example, Wikipedia is not the first place you're going to go to discover if somebody has a Christian worldview. As a matter of fact, most of the time when you examine anyone's history on Wikipedia, they've removed whatever their relationship was to Jesus. Okay, they could be a priest sometimes, and they will remove that piece of data. But even if you just looked at those sources that are secular and generally not all that eager to tell you about the Christian identity of famous historical people, you will discover even there that these people who I've described, who are all Jesus followers, are described as the fathers and mothers of their disciplines. They are the people who started the discipline that we now know of modern chemistry. Father of, that's a Christian. Quantum mechanics, father of, it's a Christian. You will go through this and see that every major scientific discipline, all the way through, including many of the computer sciences, all the stuff that you think of evolutionary sciences, that you think, oh, there's no Christians there. Oh, actually, there's a ton there. And my point is, if you looked at their writings, you can reconstruct from their personal journals and their writings, which are about Jesus and not about the sciences, because they did both. Some of these people did both. They would write about Jesus, and they would also write about their scientific disciplines. Well, I went out and tried to find all of their writings about Jesus. If they wrote letters to loved ones, well, I found those letters. You can reconstruct the story of Jesus most robustly. Well, of course, the most robust way you can construct the story of Jesus is from the church fathers, right? Those people who are living in the first 4 or 5 centuries, the early ante-Nicene fathers that followed the apostles, they write a lot about what the apostles taught. So you can get a pretty robust picture of Jesus from the church fathers. But the second most robust picture you will get is from the science fathers. So you'd have to destroy the entire history of science in order to erase Jesus from the memory of humanity. That's the kind of impact he's had on the sciences. So Christians aren't afraid of the sciences because, number one, the sciences demonstrate the existence of God. Number two, we actually have a worldview that initiated, catalyzed, ignited the sciences. And number three, we have historically dominated them. More Nobel Science laureates are Christian than any other group. Now, we can make a decision, and I've done another podcast here, as you've seen here, another video on NRBtv and on YouTube, where I talk about my fears that we will someday step away from our role of leadership in the sciences, and I hope we never do. But we shouldn't. We have no reason to. We have dominated the sciences. The sciences will never teach us anything that isn't affirmed by a Christian worldview, because the God of Christianity is the true God who rules the universe and whose fingerprints are found in the sciences. Christian brothers and sisters, do not be afraid of the sciences. We have never been in the past. Why would we start to be now? Hope that helps you to think about our role in science. I'll see you right back here next week at Cold Case Christianity.
To hear more from J. Warner Wallace, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For more information on this week's topic, visit youtube.com/coldcasechristianity with J. Warner Wallace. Thank you for joining us on this Cold Case Christianity broadcast.